Good evening, Ian, and good evening sa lahat ng viewers ninyo.
Okay, of course, this conversation will be focused on the labor agenda of your slate. But before we go to that, let's talk about you first. Why did you decide to run for senator in 2022?
Well, quite simply and succinctly, the workers need a voice in the Senate. Sawang-sawa na rin ng mga manggagawa na hindi sila napapakinggan. And if we leave legislation to owners of businesses which dominate the Senate, wala tayong maasahan na puprotektahan nila yung karapatan ng mga manggagawa.
Okay, but basically, how would you present yourself to the voters, to the general voters? You're popular within your own circles, diba? Within the labor groups, among the labor groups. Pero to the common voter, how would you introduce yourself?
Well, I would introduce myself as first, ako'y isang litigation lawyer. And then for several years, I've been with the labor movement. I became president of Bukluran ng Manggagawang Pilipino and Super Federation, and has been in the forefront of the fight against contractualization and for the right to living wage. In fact, I frontliner in all of these struggles. And not only that, in the democratic struggles of the Filipino people, not just in the sectoral struggles of the workers. For example, yung karapatan natin sa karapatang pantao. Human rights is a big issue right now, especially the fact that we have presidential candidates from the era, from the Marcos era, na tumatakbo ngayon at medyo mataas pa ang rating.
Okay. Now, how important is the labor agenda in the 2022 elections? Kasi noong 2019, nagkaroon talaga ng pro-labor candidates. Pero right now, given our experience under the Duterte administration, especially during the pandemic, gaano ka-importante na talagang isulong yung labor agenda, yung pro-workers agenda in the 2022 election campaign?
You know, Ian, year in, year out, merong security of tenure bill na hinahain sa Kongreso at sa Senado. Hindi pumapasa. Meron din hinahain tungkol sa pagtataas ng sahod, hindi naman pumapasa. Ang problema niyan kasi, kulang pa nga ang mga kandidato galing sa labor. That's why this agenda has been talked about several times already. Pero walang nagtutulak because ang mga nandyan sa Senado at sa Kongreso, hindi naman sila committed sa welfare at interest ng workers. So it's very important. It has been very, very important, not only right now, even before. We don't have a genuine security of tenure law which will prohibit contractualization. Matagal na yan, long-standing agenda na yan. So talagang kailangan may tulak na ngayon.
I was speaking earlier with Attorney Nery Colmenares, and off-cam we were talking about the pro-labor candidates dito sa 2022 elections. My personal observation, correct me if I'm wrong, parang mas malakas yung pitch for a pro-labor candidates in 2022. Tama po ba? Parang mas malakas ngayon ang push.
Yes, I think so. 10 years ago, if you don't have money, you don't have machinery, and you're not part of the traditional political parties and the dynasties here in this country, we would have been dismissed.
Pero pag-usapan natin yung importanteng panukalang batas na balak nyo isulong, security of tenure law. Okay? So that was promised by most of the candidates for president in 2016. In fact, President Duterte promised, diba? Sabi niya, he would end contractualization. But once he was in power, he realized it was not as easy as it appeared during the campaign. And it turned out, actually, the security of tenure bill that came out, diba? It wasn't approved because even if it wasn't approved, the version was described as watered down. Tama po ba?
Yes, that's true.
Okay.
Ian.
So dito,
Yes.
pag-usapan natin yung sinusulong yung security of tenure law. What would you like to see? What would be a genuine law that would really prohibit contractualization?
We must not compromise on security of tenure. We must abolish all manpower agencies. Ang problem natin sa security of tenure law, which was eventually vetoed by President Duterte, it gives or offers a false dichotomy that we have what we call a legal contracting or legitimate contracting and an illegitimate contracting. And the only reason why you are a legitimate contractor is if you have money, substantial capital. Yeah. We must do away with that distinction. All manpower agencies, whether they have substantial capital or not, are illegal. They violate security of tenure that is enshrined in the Constitution. Wala namang silbi yan eh. Iyan eh. Like for example, ang trabaho, nandun naman yan sa principal. It's part of the business operation of the principal. In fact, the principal uses the labor power of the workers and earns profit from using that labor power. Hindi naman yan business operation ng Manpower Agency. Bakit mo ngayon sasabihin na itong mga manggagawang to ay manggagawa ng Manpower Agency? Ang business operation sa'yo. Ikaw ang kumikita. Ikaw ang gumagamit ng labor power ng mga manggagawa. Alisin na natin itong medyo, yes, yan.
So dapat may direktang labor, employer-employee relationship. Direkta.
Yes.
Walang layering in the form of manpower agencies.
Yes, that's, manpower agencies serve the purpose of merely circumventing security of tenure. At we have all of this pretense na manggagawa yan ng manpower agency. Wala namang control, wala namang kinalaman yan sa business operation. All they do is that they earn 10% on top of the salary of the worker. Laway-laway lang. Kikita ng milyon-milyon. Hindi naman sila, wala naman silang ambag sa produksyon. Mga linta ang mga manpower agency. We have to do away with this.
How about the argument na if the manpower agency is the one in charge of providing the benefits under the labor code, for instance, to the employer, to the employee, would that be good? Would that be a good compromise?
Definitely no. These are mandated benefits which the workers should really be given or granted. By law, they have the right to all of these benefits. Ang pera na yan ay pinagtrabahuan nila and in fact, ay nanggaling din naman sa principal yan. Why do we have to, continue with the pretense na hindi sila manggagawa ng principal?
Okay. So tanggalin ng lahat ng manpower agencies. Pero how about the nuances that were often cited whenever deliberations were done on a security of tenure bill? Ang sinasabi nila, hindi lahat ng trabahador, hindi lahat ng trabaho ay pwedeng i-consider na hindi pwedeng i-regularize. For example, lagi sinasabi, may seasonal work, project basis. Now, a sweeping security of tenure law would actually work to the detriment of not just of the employers but also the employees down the line. Anong sagot niya?
No, manpower agencies are irrelevant to the fact that there are seasonal workers and there are...
Tanggalin na nga natin yung manpower. Pero yung contractualization mismo, parang kailangan ba siyang abolish? Kaya ba siyang abolish talaga?
Maybe we are referring to a bilateral setup. When we say bilateral setup, ito yung direct hire. And of course, the question of whether or not the worker is regular depends on the nature of the work itself. It doesn't depend on who the worker is. If the work is permanent, it's really usually necessary and desirable to the usual trade or business. It's part of the business operation. The establishment cannot do without it. Then they are regular workers. But if the work is temporary in nature, it's temporary, it's project, it's seasonal, then the worker becomes a seasonal worker or a project worker. So it has nothing to do. Contractualization has nothing to do at all with this type of setup because your tenure depends on the availability of the work. We don't even call it contractualization. What we call contractualization are what we call the trilateral setup. They don't hire workers in a direct hire system. They go through a manpower agency and then they carry the pretense that these workers are not their workers and they are workers of the manpower agencies. So that's what we call contractualization. Bilateral setup, temporary workers, that's already under the law. We don't question that. It also is different if you combine the two. If you combine the two, it's a bilateral setup and then the work is permanent, but yet you categorize the worker as seasonal, project, temporary, pipe. That's already illegal under the law.
Ang worst yan, one of the worst practices yung binanggit yung 555, no?
Yes.
So bago ko umabot ng 6 months, tama ba? Isisibakin ka. And then kukunin ka uli. At bago ka umabot ng 6 month mo, kukunin ka na naman, di ba? Tatanggalin ka, kukunin ka para ma-skirt yung responsibility ng employer to give you benefits according to the law.
That's correct, Ian. And that's already illegal under the labor code. You don't even have to pass a law to make it illegal. But what we want to make illegal or abolish would be the trilateral setup. The use of manpower agencies in order for the capitalist or the business to say that these workers are not their workers, they are the workers of the manpower agency.
Okay. Now, just to give the viewers a sense of how urgent this proposal is, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. A lot of jobs were lost. And why is it very incumbent upon the next batch of legislators to actually push for this? A genuine security of tenure law.
Precisely because we are in a pandemic. We are in an emergency situation where people are, starving, an economic downturn. And the effect of contractualization here is that these workers will be reduced merely to, at most, to earning the basic minimum wage without any opportunity for a pay raise, without any opportunity for taking care of their families. We must understand that everyone is in agreement that the basic minimum wage is not enough in order to for your family to live. That's why we are calling for living wage, not merely minimum wage. Precisely because we are in the pandemic, workers must have protection and security. We have a human crisis. Human beings must be first. Yes.
And if you are not a regular employee, let's say contractual now, you're more prone to abuse coming from employers. Diba? That's a very basic consideration.
You can be removed anytime for any reason.
Okay.
Physical and capricious reasons.
Okay. Let's also shine a light on the other problem, the other side of the contractualization problem. No? So basically, we're talking about a problem within the private sector. But there's also an equally problematic situation when you talk about contractualization in government. No? Do you have any plans regarding that? How exactly do you think that can be solved or addressed? Ang dami, di ba? I just don't have the numbers now, pero libo-libo rin yung contractual employees coming from the biggest employer in the country, which is the government.
Government should pave the way. Ang dami-dami dyan, mga job order, direct set up pa nga eh. Nakakatawa nga yan, when this contractualization issue ay umusad in 2016 onwards, what they did with the JOs ay nag-hire na rin sila ng manpower agency because they know bilateral type of contractualization, meaning to say you hire direct and yet you turn a permanent worker into a temporary worker, misclassify the worker as casual or project or seasonal. This is already illegal. So what government did was to hire manpower agencies in order to legalize this type of a setup. Now, government should pay or give the example. Dapat alisin nila yung contractualization sa gobyerno mismo. If Vico Soto of Pasig can do it, ano pa kayong iba? We are not even talking here about an impossible situation because this has been done.
Pero I remember, Attorney Luke, ang isang complication dyan before during that debate was the civil service rules, no?
Yes, no problem. It has nothing to do with contractualization. You apply the civil service rule, you directly hire, and you don't make this employee contractual.
But how about the requirements? Qualifications, yes. Basically. Oh, paano yun?
If they have qualifications, pre-employment, no problem. I-test mo yung manggagawa. But doon, pagkatapos mo i-test, pagkatapos niya mag-qualify, ba't mo naman siyang gagawing contractual? Ba't mo naman siyang gagawing temporaryo? JO na pa 6 months. Irregular mo.
Okay. Now, in reality, is this still a very rampant practice? For instance, certain owners of companies, they put up their own manpower agencies through certain fronts, siguro, no? Siguro kamag-anak. Tapos yung manpower agency na yun yung magsusupply doon sa kumpanya nila originally ng mga empleyado. Very rampant pa rin po.
Yes, oo. Grabe yan, Ian. We have a case wherein yung manpower agency ay nilagay sa pangalan ng manager ng business. So, illegal. It's what we call an in-house manpower agency. It's already illegal under Department Order 174. Pero dahil nga ang enforcement, aside from the fact na yung law, watered down, kulang, ang enforcement itself kulang. So nakakalusot itong mga establishments na to na meron na nga silang batas na pabor sa kanila, gumagawa pa rin ng illegal.
Okay. Earlier you mentioned living wage, no? Very fair proposal, not just minimum wage. Alam naman natin yung minimum wage as determined by the regional wage boards are not enough, basically, no? Pero when you talk about living wage, how do you intend to actually implement this?
Okay.
Kasi some of your colleagues, no, within the labor sector are pushing for an across-the-board wage increase. Pero sa inyo, what's your proposal?
Yes. We must first clarify concepts. When we talk about living wage, you know, the amount would be the cost of living of the worker, and it's mathematical. And
in that particular area.
Yes, Ernesto Pernia, the former NEDA secretary, admitted that for an average worker to be able to feed his family, he must earn, or he or she must earn 46,000 a month. That is way above what is being given the worker. That translates into 1,615 a day. And we have 537 in NCR alone. Now, what we are pushing right now, the one that's on the table, would be 750 daily wage for the worker across the board without distinction as to which region. So we must abolish also the regional wage boards. Now, this is not enough, definitely, when you compare it with 1,615. But then, what you must have is secure the 750 plus. You must add on to the 750, not necessarily in terms of monetary pay from the employer, but in policies of the government that will seek to reduce the cost of living of the worker. For example, ang mahal-mahal ng kuryente natin. Kung makain ng malaking porsyento ng kita ng manggagawa, then we must push for policies, part of the plus, na i-reduce yung presyo ng kuryente. We must push for policies na hindi na kailangan gastusan ng manggagawa ang hospitalisasyon. We call that social wage. So we make it part of the plus. So 750 is on the table, plus. We must also reduce the expenditure of the worker by looking at prices, policies that, looking at taxes, for example. We have excise taxes and VAT. Tumataas ang presyo ng mga bilihin. We must have to do away with all of these consumption taxes and and start imposing a wealth tax. Tax on income rather than tax on consumption.
In short, basically put more money in the pockets of the poor and make sure that they get to keep most of them.
Yes, that's true, Ian. That's true.
Okay. Attorney Luke Espiritu, thank you very much for joining us tonight on the program, sir.
Thank you very much, Ian.
Maraming salamat po.